All right, well, I will go ahead and get this started here so we can be on track with your time. I want to honor all of your time. So thank you again for joining us. And I'm really excited to introduce some great women who are on our team. First, Joanne Schinstock. She is serving as the principal at Scholé Academy, which is our online academy through Classical Academic Press. She's been teaching for several years and came on to our staff as a writing instructor at Scholé Academy 4 years ago now, 5 years ago. And this year she has stepped up her role as one of our acting principals for Scholé Academy. So thrilled to be working with her more frequently starting this summer. Presenting today is Angelique Chaverri, and we're really excited to have her at this event this afternoon. She has her master's in special education from Missouri State University, and she is coming to us this afternoon with about more than 15 years of experience working with students with all different types of learning disabilities, including those who have issues with reading, math, spelling, writing, dyslexia, auditory processing, attention problems, sensory processing. And so we are thrilled to have her speak into teaching and utilizing curriculum to serve these students. And I will, from here, pass it along to Angelique. Thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Yay. Let me, I am not able to share my screen.
Oh, let me fix that for you.
Okie
That would be helpful.
Try that again.
Oh, I guess let me say one more thing. Right now I have the gallery view. If you go up to the top right of your screen, there's a speaker view option, which I would encourage you to use. So you could click on that and really get a nice view of the speaker, which is probably me right now, but it will go to Angelique in a moment. And it will also help with being able to see the stuff that she is sharing on her screen. Okay, now I'm done talking.
Okie dokie. Can you guys see me?
Yep.
Okie dokie. All right, so thank you for that fantastic introduction. I am super excited to be here today. I'm Angelique Chaverri. I'm in Missouri. I'm originally from Oklahoma, but I've been in Missouri a long, long time. And I am super excited to be working with Classical Academic Press now. On that first page there is my email address. If anybody has any questions after we're done, feel free to email me. Okay, what am I doing wrong? It's not progressing. Wait, there we go. It was just delayed. We kind of went over this already in my little introduction, so I'll just skip everything but one detail, that I'm kind of an odd special ed teacher in that I did a lot of cross training into therapy modalities and different things that might more commonly be used by therapists in hospital-based settings. So I was usually the only educator in those. So I have a slightly different take on learning than a lot of special ed teachers might. For the CSLD, we are a team of special educators here to assist students and families with any educational need. We offer anything from just a simple checkup call with mom to try to help her figure out how to set up the learning environment, or a little more in depth how to modify certain curriculum, all the way to ongoing services directly to the students themselves on a regular basis. Pretty much whatever it is that you need. If you have a family that needs help, please send them our way. The student does not have to be a student enrolled with any of the Classical Academic Press schools. Right now, our policy is we ask that they do either have a formal diagnosis or are looking to find a formal diagnosis or moving in that direction. Okie dokie. So just right up front, writing and rhetoric is really different than any other written language program I've ever worked with. I really encourage you, if you're not familiar with this program, to read the author's notes and to also read the tools at the back of the book. You will find that you have less need to modify this curriculum than others. This is the author's heart and attitude is really incredible. So I really encourage you to be very familiar with that. I know Joanne has talked about even letting your parents, encouraging them to read those, or if they don't have copies themselves, make copies and let them read that, because it's just really fantastic for all students, especially those who have some kind of learning challenge. Now today also what you're going to be learning is going to be helpful for all of your students, not just for those with some type of learning challenge. As with the classical model itself, it's helpful for everyone, not just students with learning challenges. And it's not moving again. We'll get there. There we go. Okay, so what you need to be doing with your parents, we need to really foster a community mindset. If you've had families that have come out of other systems, sometimes they're kind of have been made to feel that they don't know what they're talking about with their child. We really need to make sure they understand we're a team, we're all working on this together, that the parent is the expert on their child. Very often I find that moms will be like, well, you know, I'm seeing some things, but it probably doesn't mean anything. But when they start to tell me things that they're not sure how it connects, I can see how those dots go together. And I'm able to say, oh, well, this means this and this means this. And I'm so glad you told me that. So just foster that open communication and encourage your parents that they're the authority, they're the expert on their child. They need to trust their instincts. If they think there's something wrong, most cases there probably is. Even if it just seems like a small thing, it's worth talking to someone about, and that's part of what we're here for. Something got funky there. Let's do what we can. We don't have to get these kids up at 100%. Let's just do what we can and encourage the learning process as we go. One thing that really is big for our moms is if a kiddo is struggling in a certain area, they think it's their fault, that they've done something wrong. And we need to communicate to them that it's an opportunity for growth. It's not something they've done wrong in most cases. A very small percentage of kids is their issue actually related to how they've been educated. They also need to know they're not alone. Parents often don't want to talk about the struggles or what's going on. They want to avoid a stigma. And we need to let them know that we're all a team. We're here to help. We're not here to make them feel guilty for what they haven't done or anything like that. We're here to help and all work together because our goal is the child. Now, teachers, I want you to take a deep breath. Your students do not have to perform at 100%, perform 100% of the work at 100% proficiency. So if you've got a kiddo that you know has dyslexia or something like that, it's okay. Your job is not to get them here. Your job is to just keep on building that brick wall little bit by little bit. As Andrew Pudawa says, we're just going to ask for easy +1. You're going to be able to help them be able to think well, write well, and speak well. It's going to come a little at a time. The biggest thing is we want you to get to know your students. If there is a way for you to carve out time to sit down and have a one-on-one chat with each one of them and on a regular basis and build that relationship, get to know what's hard for them and what's easy for them, what makes them feel uncomfortable and what they're excited about. Okay, this is one I'm super, super excited about. Proper seating. This isn't something that we're usually educated on, but good posture is incredibly important. Back in the old days, you know, like early 1900s, even mid-1900s, they would come in and they would size the chairs and the tables, the desks to the kiddos several times a year. Their feet should be flat on the floor with the knees slightly below the hips. Now, if you've got a kiddo that their legs are long enough that their knees are above their hips, you need to switch chairs. Their back should be straight. The back of the chair needs to be supporting the trunk, and their head needs to be up. Their eyes should be able to look at their work without rounding the back. And again, ideally, desks and chairs would be adjusted to fit each student on a quarterly basis. You may not have that ability, but you can, your desks and your chairs, you might not be able to change those around, but you could put something under the kiddo's feet. And then I'm going to show you a couple of options for slant boards. And I don't know why, but I can't see myself, Tristan, so I don't know for sure if you guys are going to be able to see this okay. Your students should never be working on a flat surface. They, if you can see this, this is a slant board, and it has these little legs to make it sit up. This one is well loved, well used. It has a little thing up here. This one's also magnetic. 22-degree slant. If you're not able to get slant boards, we have another option, because teachers love to make things out of what they have. I've got two, if you can see this, I've got two binders stacked up here, and you can use binder clips to hold them together, and then even something like this to hold the paper on it. And I just use one of these handy, I don't know how to say it, to check and make sure I was at a 22-degree slant. That's incredibly important. There's all kinds of good science out there about why. So we talked about chairs being in the right size chair, but also something that may help. And one of the private schools I work with here locally to me has made this required for all students, the slant boards. And this is a balance cushion. You can put it in the seat. It has kind of a knobby side and a little bit smoother side, but they can sit on that and it will help hold their hips in the correct position. Also, anytime you require balance, even though they're not standing up, they are having to balance to sit on one of those, it triggers the cerebellum, which improves focus and attention. And hey, who doesn't want that? Okay, so for your kiddos that writing is hard, some more before the lesson stuff. Ideally, PE should come directly before your student's hardest subject. Now, I know that that is not, you don't always have control over your schedule during the day, and I know that trying to carve out time may be really difficult, but if you can carve out 10 minutes and you go have a, whether it's in your classroom or out on the playground or whatever, and you set up an obstacle course where everybody kind of gets through this and gets the jitters out. We want to get the heart rate up. We want compression of joints and engagement of the muscles, which those two are known as proprioception. If anybody has any OT or PT friends, they'll talk to you about this. So things that would compress the joints and engage the muscles are carrying something heavy, push-ups, which you could just do wall push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups on pull-up bars if you've got those on the playground. Running is great, jumping jacks. And then when you get back in the classroom or right before you get ready to sit down, some hand warm-ups. And if you'll go check out the Lean Berets on YouTube, Ron Jones is a friend of mine, and he is fantastic. He is the classical PE guy, and I wish more people knew about him. But he has a specific watch list for, I think it's PE 101, and it's specific to classical PE. I'll bet a bunch of you didn't even know that was the thing. And he has a specific video in there about hand warm-ups. But we want to warm up the muscles in our hands and do some simple little things to get the nerves awake and working before we start the lesson, and it's helpful for anyone. So if you have kiddos that struggle, and I know it went out in one of our newsletters, but I'm not sure if the link made it in there. I did a podcast with Ron Jones of the Lean Berets about the reflexes in the hands and how they're related to writing and learning. And if you've got a kiddo that's really struggling, you're only going to be able to get to, with handwriting, not with getting their thoughts on the page, but with handwriting itself, where they're using their hands. You're only going to have about 2 minutes before they go into fight or flight. So at that point, you're going to need to talk through the work with them, scribe for them, or maybe think about some working groups where you have each student is working in their strength. So a kiddo that is really struggling with writing, they have a different job, and somebody else who writing is not a problem at all, they're acting as the scribe for the group. If possible, for those kiddos that are struggling, allow them to lay on their stomachs while writing. And this would be for more than just your kiddos that are having literal trouble writing. This is also for the kids that have trouble sitting in a chair, or staying seated. There's a lot going on. It's actually a very complex thing to sit in a chair. Most of us don't think about it, but there's a lot more to that, which I hope to present on in the future. You can also offer balance boards. They can stand on the balance board, maybe in the back of the classroom, and give them a clipboard to hold their pages, or whatever they need to do while they're working. And I realize not all of these are going to be possible, but these are some ideas that some people are going to be able to work in, and just be creative. Okay, computer, here we go. We're ready to move forward. There we go. Okay, so let's talk about some red flag signs. So sometimes kiddos will get to the point of meltdown, and we don't want to allow that to happen, but there's a way you can stop it before it happens. And sometimes they hold all this in and wait till they get home and melt down at home. That's probably more common. So that's where your relationship with the families is important, to find out what's happening. If they're holding it together all day at school and then they go to pieces as soon as they get home, then we need to change some things in the classroom during the day. Watch them for red face or red ears. They may just get red on the tip of their ears and not their whole face, but that's a sign that adrenaline is starting to pump. If they're starting to breathe faster, that's a sign. If their voice tone changes because their muscles in their neck and their throat are tightening up, that's a sign that you need to watch for. Tight muscles are just being tense. So maybe it's their jaw, maybe it's arms, shoulders, or hands. You want to watch for those things and stop them before they get any further. Okay, here's a big one that most people are not aware of. One of the things I've trained in is primitive reflexes. And there's a reflex called fear paralysis. It serves a very real function. It's in any prey animal. So when you are driving down the street and you see a rabbit in your neighbor's yard and you're not sure if it's a new yard ornament or a real live bunny, it's fear paralysis at work. It allows us to get so still that hopefully whatever is chasing us will not see us and move on. So that was very helpful when we were, living pretty much in the wild and predator animals were a concern for us, but it's not so helpful in the classroom because test anxiety, being called on to answer a question, all those things can cause the same reaction in the nervous system. So this often looks like, this isn't on the list, but children holding their breath. And that one's a hard one to catch, but if they're writing and holding their breath, then we have fear paralysis going on and we need to stop them, stop writing. If they freeze up, thinking slows. Literally what happens is the blood drains out of the brain to some extent. Thinking slows, respiration slows down considerably, digestion stops. So then we'll have kids with tummy aches. They'll have difficulty speaking or answering questions. They'll forget information that they know, or maybe it's a spelling test and mom swears they did it 10 times yesterday and they got 100% every time. It may be fear paralysis taking place here. When frustration appears, we need to take the focus off the student. So if you've called on them to answer a question and they freeze up, just move on. Pause the work if needed. Move to a different setting if possible. And again, this isn't always possible, but as you go through the course of the school year and you get to know your kids, start figuring out what is coming up that would be a really good idea for you to have these other things available. Outside is ideal. Again, not always possible, but it is the best. Barefoot and outside is even better. If you can have a basket of blankets by the door And every time you're going to be reading the story through or working out, and you're going to have to be writing or something, you get to know your class. When do you need to do this? But the kiddo that needs that regulation, it's that kiddo's job to carry the basket of blankets, because again, carrying something heavy regulates the nervous system. Or maybe you've got a couple of kids that are having a tough time. Have them team up, one on one side of the basket, one on the other. You have lots of options. This is just something to get you thinking in that direction. So maybe you can't take a break and go out, take the class outside. Maybe that kiddo needs to go take a break and get a drink. Maybe that's not an option, or they say they don't need a drink, but you know they need to step out for a minute. Write a note, maybe set up something with the school secretary or whatever, where you just have a code word that Johnny needs a break for a second. And you just write a little note on a piece of paper, fold it up and say, hey, could you run this to the office for me? And I need you to sit there and wait for the response. And so then the school secretary knows when they get that note, Johnny or Susie needs to sit down for a second and take a breath. And then she's going to take her time and write you a little note back and then hand it back. And hopefully, if kiddo is in on this, they'll pump their arms and walk and kind of get their heart rate up while they're walking down the hallway to come to the office and back to the classroom, and kind of burn off some of that adrenaline, because that's what's happening. And we need to burn that out of the system, and physical exercise is the best way to do that. I have seen some classrooms that had a pull-up bar hanging in the back of the classroom. I know with my own family, we homeschool, when we have a really tough time, like go outside, go do your pull-ups. You know, I need 15 pull-ups and 5 sit-ups or whatever works for that kiddo. And they come back and they feel better. Keep it light, encourage, 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 and always smile. Because when you look upset or concerned, it scares the kiddo and it makes it even worse. I mean, it doesn't take much, just a little bit of a, okay. Now, if possible, like I already briefly went over, do something physical. Frustration causes a buildup of adrenaline in the system, and we need to burn that off. So they need to go, if possible, they need to go pull-ups, push-ups, whatever, until they feel a release. And that means the adrenaline has been used up. And again, this isn't always possible, but avoid screen time. Screens are irritating to the nervous system and to the eyes, and it makes it harder to come down off that. If writing has been traumatic, now we've all had experiences in school where it was kind of traumatic for us. For me, it was math, and I wasn't bad at math, but I wasn't as good at math as some other kids in the classroom, and they made it really difficult on the rest of us. And so I just didn't even want to have anything to do with math for a long time, and even organized my college schedule. So in my what I was doing in college so that I would avoid the math classes. It wasn't until I was teaching it and teaching my own children as an adult that I kind of got past some of that. And very often I look back and go, oh, that was fear paralysis in me, where I was freezing up in the classroom and not able to get everything out of the education that I was being offered. Now, sometimes we all need a reset. And I talked about this briefly before, but set up a comforting, peaceful environment. And this is that idea of Scholé, the restful learning. Maybe during this lesson, you circle up the desks or the chairs and you allow snacks. And everybody has something to drink or whatever. Maybe you take those blankets out under a tree in the schoolyard, and everybody spread out on their bellies or whatever is comfortable, and you have your reading time, your book club type idea. Fluorescent lights, they're very irritating to the system, to the eyes. We just aren't often aware of it. Some kids are more sensitive than others. So if you can, turn off those fluorescent lights in the classroom. Natural light is best, but lamps are also great. Have the families bring in some floor lamps and tell them what you're trying to do. They can donate so that you can have lamps specifically for your classroom. Little battery powered tea lights are also lovely, and I'm sure you guys can think of lots of different ideas, but make it a peaceful, comforting environment. Okay, so probably most of you are familiar with scaffolded instruction, but why is this helpful for a kiddo who's had a traumatic experience? So we're wanting to just gradually move them out of that place. So if you think of Pavlov and all of his work, we want to train them that this isn't a scary thing after all. We want to begin by reading through and modeling the entire lesson for the students ourselves and make it relaxing and peaceful. Involve them in the discussion and write their ideas down. Maybe you're writing it on the board or on an overhead or something, but you're showing them that the ideas they have, the things they have to say are valuable and important. Smile. Make it a happy time, not a we have to get through this time. After a week or two of building rapport with writing, notice I'm not saying building rapport with the students or with each other. This is we're trying to deal with writing has been tough and we're trying to make it not awful anymore. So after a week or two of building rapport with writing, ask your students to complete one task. Choose whatever task will be easiest for him or her. Gradually add one task at a time, giving time for your students to build confidence. So this can be that idea of team and that you're getting to the point where you're changing up the jobs a little bit, but you're still making it something more simple, something that they can do. Start with the easiest task and work towards the harder tasks. Different students may start with different tasks. This is going to look different in every classroom. And again, if you need some help working through this, that's what we're here for. Okay, so those are some brief things that will really work for anything, no matter if it's science or Latin or whatever, those can be implemented in anything. But let's look specifically now at writing and rhetoric. And because there are big differences depending on what book you're in and what level you're in, these aren't going to be terribly specific, but I think Joanne and I can do a little more specifics later in our lesson. Some of your students in the story section may have trouble with understanding what they hear. So these are our kiddos who may have some auditory processing issues, or they may still be coming down off some fear paralysis. Read a little slower for them. Give them time to process what you're saying. Take pauses, emphasize the important things or the exciting things, because the change in voice tone will help them process that information. If you have kiddos that are really struggling with this, you need to have them seated against a wall because that limits how sound is bouncing around the room. And I don't think I actually have that on the slide, but you want them with their back to the wall. One of the schools I work with here locally, they've gone to kind of a U setting where the students are in a U and the teacher is at the top of the U, and the kiddos that are, well, then everybody is almost against a wall, but the kiddos that are really struggling are kind of at the top of the U. You need to speak directly to the student's face because they need both ears getting that as much of that auditory signal as possible at the same time so that their brain has the best chance possible to make sense of that. Use visual aids such as pictures or diagrams. If it helps them, they can draw what they hear. So some kiddos, just because they're drawing or not looking at you, they may really still be taking it in. But you'll have to do a check for understanding. Make sure that that's okay. If they're not getting it, if that's a distraction, then we need to put that aside. Some kiddos have trouble understanding what they see, and this can be labeled dyslexia. And just briefly, if they come to you and with a diagnosis of dyslexia, there's many different types of dyslexia. Visual dyslexia is actually the most rare, where they actually feel like things are moving on the page. Auditory dyslexia, where what they're hearing gets confused, is more common. If they are having trouble understanding what they see, and this also kiddos may come with a visual processing deficit diagnosis, or maybe they're in vision therapy or have been in vision therapy. Just because they've been released from vision therapy doesn't mean that they're completely 100% able to understand. It means there was a weakness there. They are much better now, but that may still be a low area for them that needs a little bit of help. If they're having trouble understanding what they see, read for them, have a partner read, give them a job in their strengths. Highlighters, have them highlight keywords. Maybe you need to highlight the keywords for them. Annotation, and Joanne will be, she's your person for how to annotate. There are some helpful things about how to annotate in the book. I've just been really, really impressed with this program in that aspect. Offer an outline for them to keep track of details if needed, especially as you get into the later books and the passages are longer. Maybe if they're not writing in their book or they're not comfortable with that, or maybe the school's not allowing that or whatever, or maybe they're just having trouble keeping track, it would be helpful for them to use their finger and follow along, but you can also give them an outline where they can draw little symbols or images or even a word or here or there. You're going to have to get to know your kids and find out what works for them.
Angelique, did you want to show them what this looks like in the text right now, or did you want to wait till closer towards the end to show a section of the book that speaks about all these pieces right now that you're addressing?
Yeah, that would be great. If we can pull up maybe a couple of different examples, one from a lower level and one from a higher level.
Okay.
While you're getting that, if you guys can see me, kids who have trouble visually get overwhelmed easily, especially if there's a lot on the page. Covering it up with a blank white piece of cardstock, regular piece of paper, they're going to be able to see through it. A piece of cardstock would be ideal. I don't know if you guys can see this, but I've cut, if you haven't, I'll show you again in a second. I've cut a line out of this cardstock so that all you can see, all the kiddo can see, and maybe you want to do it more in the middle so that they've got something blocking what they're not needing to be looking at above and below, but only what they're needing to read is there, and they move it down the page. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay. Did it get, so Joanne, did you have that up?
Yeah, so this is from a middle school book. This is book 7. So this would be year 4 if students are 7th, 8th grade. You could have some 6th graders in a class like this if they are above their grade level. So this page right here that you're looking at that says mark up the text, this is in all of the books once annotation is introduced. And it's brought in year 4, so in the middle school. And so the book provides suggestions here. You can see these are very common practices: underlining main ideas, putting question marks in the margin, writing quotations, exclamations, exclamation points, circling ideas or words they're not familiar with. This is a teacher's edition. So this also shows you that students are they have an option here to practice an outline. So this would be something that the teacher would walk them through. So it's very flexible and accommodating, but the teacher can decide within the class time that they have, where do they need to spend their time, or sections that she wants or he wants to bring in. But this is an example of those two pieces that Angelique was talking about with helping children to understand what they see. And then the teacher guides will also guide the teacher on pieces that you would want the student to annotate. So if you want to, and I've even done this in my class where I will share the teacher guide just for this type of view so that they can see what does annotation look like. And certainly my book, the actual book is marked up with my own annotation. So I do that with them, that practice of active reading. And so those pieces are built into the expectation that students are actively reading, annotating, and then being asked to either verbally retell what's happened or to do a written outline. Those are all worked in there. So I think that gives you an idea of how the series really speaks to the common modifications and accommodations that many of these students with learning differences would need. And these are practices that help everyone.
Yes. Okay.
Did you want me to pull up a lower school book? I'll get that ready if you want to keep going with your section.
That's it. Why don't you guys give us some comments of what you would like to see? I'm new. I've never hosted a Zoom meeting before, so we're gonna get there, but I appreciate your patience. Okay, so here we go, computer. Come on. It's just really overwhelmed today, I think. There we go. Okay, next section, tell it back, which is often the narration. Some students may have trouble with remembering the details in order or may have difficulty speaking in front of others. So you want to remind them to use their annotations or outline. You want to watch for those signs of fear paralysis. Rely on the provided questions in the book, which is just fantastic, as prompts. For a kiddo that's really struggling, don't require them to narrate a full passage on their own. You certainly want to do a lot of modeling as much as possible and encourage. Smile, encourage, we're all in this together. This is a fun thing, a pleasant thing. Then when we get to the memoria, which I just think this is fantastic, and let me just for a second say, I've worked with kids from all different educational backgrounds, and the classical kids are always, regardless of neurological deficit, they are always head and shoulders above kids from other educational backgrounds. And I really attribute a lot of this to the memorization that we require and encourage. It really does a lot in the brain that you may not be aware of. See the teacher edition notes in the book. I mean, it's really fantastic how this is laid out. Give plenty of opportunities for them to repeat the passage. This is all your kids, not just the ones who are struggling, but plenty of opportunities for them to repeat whatever the passage is that you're asking them to memorize. If they're an auditory kid or a visual kid or a motor kid, take that into consideration. Different things are going to work for different students. So try different things as groups and then let them figure out what works best for them. You can print the passage out. This is one of my favorite things to do, and cut it out. And then you have it all sitting there and you remove one word and they say it and have to remember what word is missing, and so on and so forth. You can have one student say a few words and another student pick up, and there's all kinds of ways to do that, but make it fun and make it non-threatening. Okay, and if anybody wants to see examples of those passages or of the teacher notes, put it in the comments and we'll get that up for you. And I'm not really seeing the comments, so Joanne, hopefully you are.
I am, I'm watching them.
Okay, good. Okay, so then the talk about it section. Some students may have trouble with vocabulary or the go deeper stuff. If you have a vocab word that you're working on, don't just leave it in the book. Write it up on the board. Write the word in a different color than the definition itself. Then take the color that you wrote the word in and underline a keyword or two to help draw their attention to that. Make sure you leave adequate space between the words, because especially for our visual processing issue kids, it kind of moves together and it gets confusing, and it needs to be very clear. Take your time so students can process. Don't get in a hurry. Draw or show an illustration if possible, or if it applies. Speak clearly and directly to the students' faces for those that have trouble with what they hear. And you're going to have kids that they don't know that this is a problem. You're going to have families that don't know this is an issue for their kids, especially depending on how they've been educated before they came to you. Their weak area may never have been really pushed on or tested, and now suddenly it's showing up. Write their answers down, underline keywords in a different color. We already said that. Okay, then when you get to the writing time, when they're going to be rewriting sentences and the copiousness exercises, sentence play, things like that. And I think, I talked about if it's reading what they're supposed to be doing, something like this may be very helpful so that it's not as overwhelming. If you want to only require some of your kids to do certain things, you may want to go around with a highlighter and highlight what you want them to do so that they can let go of the rest. There's a lot of ways to do it. That's just one that I like, because especially for kids with a visual issue, highlighting it helps differentiate it from what's on the rest of the page and can help make it easier to see. I mean, that's why we highlight, right? So break up the tasks into multiple days or sessions. So maybe you're going to do 7 copiousness exercises. Maybe instead you do 1 or 2 in class and send 1 or 2 home, or maybe you do 1 every day for 7 days or something like that. But break it up if that's a difficult thing. You're not tied to exactly everything's in the book. I know Joanne talked about the other day on Wednesday. You're going to pick what is going to work for your class. Let's see, scribe for the student, or you can have students work in teams. Joanne, what were you saying?
I was just going to say, I was just looking at the chat box. We had an ask to show the Memoria exercise. So when you're at a good stopping point, then I can share the text again.
Okay, I'll do the last point on this slide and then we'll back up.
Great.
You can even consider setting a timer and have everyone in the class stop writing when it goes off. So this would be an effort to not make the kiddo who's really struggling feel called out. You also want to encourage kids, don't be like, I'm done. Who else is done? You know, we want to keep this nice for everyone. Let's see, there we are. Okay.
So I like this exercise quite a bit because I really think it speaks to what Angelique was talking about. So in this particular lesson, the students had read a narrative, and then we were actually looking at, and this is a black and white copy, but I had a image of this lithograph in color. And so this is what the students and I sat around and looked at to help us understand more deeply the ideas of this narrative. And so they read something, they annotated, we talked about it, and we used this image to inspire conversation. So perhaps children who are struggling to process what they've read, we're now giving them another piece, right, to come into the story. So if they're still struggling with what they've read, they're going to initially listen, to their teacher and to their classmates about what their ideas are, but they're also going to start to be able to engage in discussion because they have this image here to look at. And you can see the questions here, right? So the teacher's going to be asking the students, what are you seeing here? How does this painting praise Florence Nightingale? It's not done through words, but it's done through visual. So, what's happening in this painting? What is it that makes this or gives us, the audience, a positive impression of Florence Nightingale? And then from there, we move into this Memoria exercise, which is what Angelique had mentioned. And this is something that I give as a homework assignment. Sometimes it's a warm-up assignment. So the students will come into class. I'll have this quote on the board, and every lesson, and again, this is the middle school exercise. We don't have the younger children necessarily doing these types of exercises at this level. They are given, quotations for memory and for recitation, but certainly when we move into middle school and we're focusing on the art of dialect, we are doing more than we are with our students who are focusing on the art of grammar. But what they do in the lower school within the writing and rhetoric program is preparing them to add into this, into their understanding the art of dialect. So they are given this quote, and as I said, they'll either be given 10 minutes in class of quiet time, and in a classroom, this is something very easy where, you could say the children could sit on their, their rest mats or blankets or pillows, or, maybe they can just sit on the floor against the wall. They could do this under, the tree outside. So there's this type of exercise, the Memoria exercise, I do think is a way to engage children in writing, perhaps if they've had a negative experience, because these exercises, it's not about assessing the form of the writing, but it's about getting their ideas down on paper, and they're practicing the writing. And the larger picture of this is that the Memoria exercise is another level of getting them to think more deeply about the ideas, and to also get out on paper, what, as the student, what do I think about this quotation, and how does this quotation relate to what I've read? And so you can see the book guides you and the students to see that, okay, I'm not just going to read this and think about it. What do I think about it? But I'm also looking at this quotation, and how does this relate to the story of Florence Nightingale? So for these middle schoolers, we're asking them also to make connections. So sometimes it's independent practice, but we always bring it back to conversation and we talk about it. So through Memoria exercise, through maybe a study of painting, there are multiple entry points in addition to the annotation where students are being invited in to the text to help them understand. And it's a layered approach. And we will spend sometimes a day, 2 class periods doing this. And that's again where the instructor can decide, the flexibility. And then I can also show you how this translates to the younger students, because their activities are different, obviously so, for their age. As I'm getting that up, Angelique, I don't want to, if you want to continue, I'll pull up the other piece.
Okay. Okie dokie. Let's see if I remember where we stopped. As I was trying to check some things and I.
No, you're right. This is where we were. You were just about to go into,
Okay.
I think you finished this writing time piece, and,
Okay,
and you had brought us one slide forward.
My computer is not wanting to move forward.
Okay, so let me share with them then this piece. So this is actually out of our book too. So this would be year 1. So we're talking 4th graders, maybe some 5th graders or 3rd graders. But for the teacher and the parent, this kind of shows you, and this is right in the beginning within the introduction, a brief overview of the entire series, right? And it shows you what's happening in the progym, which is that ancient writing system, but how that relates then to the modern composition. So fable is all about narrative with descriptive elements. And then the younger children are also working on crea and proverb. And so earlier when Angelique was talking about memorization, the other piece of this program is imitation. And that's the strength of that classical pedagogy of repetition and memorization and imitation that's really helping the children to develop these skills. And so you'll see a lot of this throughout the program. It's called the Tell It Back section or Talk About It. And so that's what's happening here, what the students are working on. And again, this is the teacher's book, so the students don't have these boxes in gray, but it's very helpful for even a new teacher who's trying to take on, let's say, these modifications and accommodations that Angelique is speaking about. The book in front of every lesson gives you the objectives, so they can quickly see maybe where do I need to go and spend the most time on with my students, and what pieces can I eliminate. But every lesson throughout the series, whether you're working with 4th graders or 9th graders, the structure is the same. It opens with the narrative. So, you're reading aloud. I read aloud with my middle schoolers, but certainly with the younger students, you're given a narrative. And then you can see, certainly with the lower school, look how short the narrative is, right? So they're very manageable, bite-sized pieces. And this is very helpful, again, with Angelique commenting on, recognizing that frustration level. As a teacher, I quickly say to myself, okay, I know that this is a very short passage, so I'm already set up in a way for success with some of my struggling students, because I know I'm not asking them to do a lot with me. And so if I do have a student that struggles, maybe I know, okay, I can do 10 minutes and make sure they get some physical activity before I sit down and spend maybe 10 or 15 minutes on this reading section, which very quickly takes me into narration or talk about it. And so the text guides the teacher on even the questions to ask, and the promptings, right? I mean, right here, we're asking the child to verbally tell back to the teacher the story. This narration piece is foundation for outlining. And outlining is done, with the older students when they're writing. But if you have an older student and they're struggling and, a modification requires them to, you're finding success that they can dictate things to you, then maybe you're not going to do right now asking him or her to give you a formal outline, but you can do this narration concept with your older students as well. We do it with the younger students. So this is just from the younger years showing you what happens. But I think you can also see how this is very easy to modify and to keep these practices with you as you're even working with your older students who might be struggling. The series is very accommodating and very understanding of the needs of the child.
Okie dokie. Hopefully the computer will play along now. Come on. We're still close. Okay. So dictation. Dictation is also really helpful for working through those pathways. There's some really great notes in the teacher's edition about dictation. Go slowly for those that need more time to process. And this is going to be your kids who have auditory issues or writing issues or sitting in chair issues. Dictation can be challenging for a lot of kids, but it's an important thing to try to do at least some of. Encourage others not to make a show of finishing first, and maybe only have the students write one sentence and work up from there. Now, a note on tough areas for kids. Of course, be watching your students for those signs of anxiety, but if students are having success in some areas and like they feel good about it, it's okay to push a little bit on a weak area. We all have things that we struggle with, we all have tough things that we need to overcome. And the only way we do that is with patience and practice and not giving up. And this is a virtue that we want to develop in our students. Just because something is hard doesn't mean we don't do it. We just take it a little slower and have lots of help and encouragement around us. Encourage them to push through a little bit, a little further than they feel comfortable with, but don't push them through red flag signs. Speak it. So kids that are having trouble with reading or speaking in front of their peers, and this is going to look different in different books at different levels, but be familiar with their piece of writing in case they need help, in case they get stuck and you need to jump in and remind them what a word is or something like that. If they don't feel comfortable reading their whole thing, maybe you ask them to read the first and last sentence or just their favorite sentence. You can allow a peer to read for them. Allow them time to practice alone or with a partner. Even having a spot that kind of blocked off, maybe you set up some bookshelves or something and you have a full-length mirror, those are cheap, on the back of a bookshelf where they can stand and practice quietly, kind of without everybody looking at them, and kind of be more comfortable. Some kids are going to like that, some kids aren't. Don't force. Build confidence in them over time. Continue to offer, and eventually they will, and then celebrate that. And then I have two more quick things. So just to go back to why we're here, the Center for Students with Learning Differences. There's lots of families out there that don't have access to services, and we want to make sure that you know we're here. Joanne's going to show you how to get to it on the website. As I said, the student does not have to be a Scholé or a St. Raphael's student, and I know we've got some two other schools coming online soon. They do not have to be a student with any of the classical academic press schools. If they don't have a diagnosis with this time, we're asking that that's something that they're moving towards, but we're here to help the parents. We're here to help the students in whatever way that they may need. We're not scary people, where a lot of families don't want a diagnosis or don't want to involve any kind of service provider for various reasons. And we want you to know that the instructors, the special needs instructors, we're homeschool moms, and we pulled our kids from, or didn't put our kids in whatever situation that they may be fearful about. And we've struggled with things with our own kids, and we've been at this for a long time. We're here to help. We're not here to tell you or your families what they're doing wrong. We're just here to offer support, because we've walked this road alone in some cases, and we know how important it is to have that help. Then I want to share one other thing that I just think this is so important. I'm a huge fan of classical classroom design and classical PE. So I mentioned Ron Jones and the Lean Berets earlier. This video is what opened my eyes to classical PE. If you'll go to Vimeo and search the Renaissance, and it needs to come specifically from Doug Orchard. There's some other things about the Renaissance, obviously, on Vimeo, but take, I think it's not quite 6 minutes long, watch this have your administrators watch this. It will blow your mind. This is the critical piece of classical education that we're missing. So please take just a few minutes, and then I'm happy to answer any questions. Now I can't figure out how to get back to where I was. I think that was it. Maybe Joanne can take over from here. It's not.
Trying to
I don't know
find
what to do.
Angelique, maybe you could copy and paste that link for that,
Yes.
that video. I was trying to search it on Vivian, but I can't find it off the top of my head. It would be nice to
Okie
get
dokie.
that. Well, thank you. That was really great, insightful. One of the questions that I have off the top of my head, just from communicating with customers, the dictation pieces that are in writing and rhetoric, and some of the stuff that prompts the student to write. If you have a reluctant writer or a student who essentially is not wanting to sit still to do those different pieces that are in the lessons, can you talk about what kind of alternatives in those particular cases? That's a, I don't want to say a common question, but it's been commented to me a couple times at some of the conventions that I've attended. So you just speak into that for a moment?
So depending on the age of the kiddo and the setting, especially if you have younger ones or even older ones, having them, we start with the hand warm-ups and have them, if they're younger, write something in highlighter for them and have them trace it and just add little bits, increase the amount they're doing over time. Standing up to write, like on an easel, or whether it's on a whiteboard or taping paper to the wall, like big craft paper or whatever. At my house, we use windows, and that would freak a lot of people out. But where we school, we don't have wall space to put a whiteboard or something like that. And somebody suggested a long time ago, right on the windows, and the kids love it. So standing up to write. Again, supports like the balance cushion, that can help. Make sure you're getting in some push-ups or something before they sit down to write. Set a timer. You only have to write for this long. Watch your kiddo. When they start getting frustrated, note how long it was, and then only have them write about that long and move them on to something else. Sometimes you may have to do some motivational things like do this and then you can do this. And I'm not a big fan of sticker charts and things like that. I'm more a fan of when you get this done, and don't push them past the red flag signs, but when you get this done, we're going to get to do this chosen activity together. Then we're going to go sit down and snuggle on the couch. If this is homeschooling families, then we're going to read this book or whatever. We just need to get this one thing done. But only just make it small and do it a little bit over time. Also give them things to write about that are interesting to them. Whether it's a picture that they find interesting or a topic they're interested in, their motivation is so important in this. Just saying you have to do this and you just have to do it. That's not getting their buy-in, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Those are a few ideas. It's going to be very specific to each individual child. And so give us a call and we're happy to help more specifically with that. But reluctant writers, there's usually something else neurologically going on. And I would certainly, if it's just not getting any better, I would direct you to look into specific therapy. And I can, my favorite is reflex therapy, because if the reflexes in the hands are not working correctly, then it doesn't matter how much occupational therapy you do, it's just going to be awful. Or we have hand specialists, and there's a lot of resources out there. But there are things that can be done. If you're not overcoming it with these accommodations, it's time to get some help from a professional.
Angelique, can I add to that also when we're talking about how do we help reluctant writers? And so the other side of that is when we're looking at the program, especially with the younger students, but you can do this also with the older students. So when the younger students, and we're, again, I'm thinking of, year 1 and 2, where they're in books 1 through 4. So there's a piece where they are learning through imitation. So the student is not having to think about the idea or even the words. Many of the exercises are, they are taking a paragraph that's already written in a story. They write that paragraph and then they're adding dialogue to it. Or you can say you can add description to it. So the text is already there written for them. They can, and I've seen this happen where they feel success, like I've written a story, but much of the practice and the experience is imitation, right? So they are doing the copy work of that story, and then they're just adding pieces. Like I said, either the dialogue or the description. And we do this even with our older students. They'll have amplification exercises. So they are, adding description to a text that's already written. So these exercises on that level of trying to help that child feel success for whatever reason that they've struggled with writing. I find that those very simple exercises just give the child kind of that open door where they don't even have to think of the ideas to write, right? So again, like Angelique says, know the child where they're at, recognize their red flags, and then pick from the text those types of activities where they are not the most taxing activity, right? The pieces are already there and they're just adding a little bit of themselves. And then you can add to that and increase the complexity of the work.
Excellent. I'd also say, if it is a specific handwriting issue, don't require them to write in, little small lined paper. There's all different sizes. It's okay for them to use bigger lined paper. It's okay for them to not use lines, because if we're not focusing on handwriting, if we're working on sentence construction or the copiousness exercises, we don't need to worry as much about what the letters and the words look like right now. It's just more getting that into them, the knowledge of that information.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, we have about 25 minutes left in this presentation. So I'd like to open up the opportunity to ask more questions of Joanne and Angelique. And since we have a smaller group here, I thought one option is to be discussing. If we were all meeting in person, we would be able to do that. So at the bottom corner, there's a reactions button on your Zoom. And there's two options. You can submit a question. You, of course, do it in the chat box, but you could also maybe just give a thumbs up if you have a question. I'd be happy to unmute you, and you can ask the question that way in real time as well. But I haven't seen too many comments come over yet, and maybe I'm about to open the floodgates here offering, but you are welcome to ask some questions and use this time to get the ear of Angelique and Joanne here. So fire away.
Angelique, can I ask you a question? I received this question last year with one of my moms, and it's that common question, I think, about when you're working with a child that has learning differences, and what advice do you give the teacher, or for the teacher to give the parent, about the role that the parent plays in trying to help them create their essay or write their essay, so that line of, this is mom's essay and it's no longer the student's essay. What do you say to kind of keep that balance of the teacher is still able to assess the student's work authentically, and not the student's work maybe with a parent's hand that's been very heavily into it?
That's really tough. I mean, just having, as long as you have that relationship built with the parent, and maybe you've already kind of started the process in the classroom where you know the child's topics, and you've given some very clear directives, like you can't help them with this or this or this. You can't choose their words for them. You can show them their resources where they can, I use a thesaurus or whatever to help them. And you can support them, like with a timer that they stay working on at this amount of time or whatever, and help them with breaks, and you be their cheerleader. But by building that relationship with them, I know even with my own son, I've been guilty of this, because he had come up with, for example, a title for something he was writing, and I I didn't really think it was great, and I didn't think it fit the requirements very well. And so I just, no, you're gonna have to come up with something different. And I gave him an idea, and he was like I was trying to make it an example, and he was like, fine, we'll just write that down then. And then I was like, oh, what did I just do? I did what I tell other people not to do. And that's what we do as parents. Sometimes we'll say, oh, we know what we should or shouldn't do, but we don't realize that's what we're doing. So asking the parent, it's okay for them to ask questions, but they've really got to be aware of making sure it's the student's idea and the student's work. And if the kiddo gets the hint, like what happened with my son, that you don't think what they're doing is good enough, they'll shut down and they'll stop. And then they'll really let the parent take over. So making the parent feel comfortable that it doesn't matter what level the work is at. That's not what we're after. We're after them learning brick by brick, little bit. Hopefully that will help. But it's a subjective thing, and trying to, I don't know a clear, specific answer for that one. Just make sure it's coming out of a place of relationship and giving them like a rubric. This is what you can do. This is what you can't do. Does that make sense? Is that all helpful?
It is, thank you.
All right, I have a couple questions that have come in, so thank you all for putting in some comments here. Angelique, we have somebody wanting to take a look at the slant board again and explain in a little bit more detail how that is helpful with using.
So this is the well-used and loved, we have 3 of these slant boards at my house. And on the back is Velcro, here, and there was different things that used to attach, the little book holders and things like that, and they're no longer around. But I'm trying to get those in here right. The legs, they fold up, fold down, so that you can fold these up and stick them on a bookshelf, nice and skinny, and save space. But there's been a bunch of math and physics stuff done to be able to tell what is, make it closer, the ideal position. And again, the desk needs to be tall enough. I think some of the research you can read on it is actually on the website for this company, and I'll put the link in the chat box. But Visual Edge Slant Board is the name of the company, Visual Edge SB. And there's a lot of research in there about why this is very helpful. If you go specifically to the manufacturer's website, I believe they have the research link there. And historically, if you watch that video on Vimeo, he'll talk about it in there as well. We want to keep the kids upright as they start rounding their shoulders and doing all this kind of stuff. As they're trying to write on a flat surface, it compresses the organs, it makes it difficult to breathe, and then they're also not getting accurate signals moving up and down their spinal column. So historically, our desks were slanted, and around World War II, for an expense and mass production reasons, everything went flat. So, and there was even a progression, they were historically at 22 degrees, and then they got lower and lower. So check for the specific research on that webpage, and I'll put the link in the chat box, and watch that video from Ron Jones. I think you'll have a better idea about it. But it literally just supports the nervous system and relieves frustration and helps them put their effort into their work and not into sitting and seeing what's on the page. Does that, feel free to ask. If I didn't answer that question, ask more.
Thanks. We have another question that has come in on some tips, which we're kind of doing in real time with the CSLD virtually, but with some of these classrooms potentially more of them moving to distance learning coming up this fall. Do you have any tips on how you assess students at the beginning of the year?
Virtually, there are, it depends on what level of assessment you're looking at. If you've had someone in your school who was doing assessment historically, in a public school system, that might be the counselor, or there might be the special ed teachers might be doing it, or there might be a specific person on staff that's what they're trained for. If you're looking at standardized assessments, I've talked to several manufacturers and they understand the need and they are going digital. Even if they don't have a standard digital product, they can give you copies of the books, you know, when we flip the pages, they can give you copies of that you can actually meet with a student virtually, and you put that up on your screen and they're looking up there. Now, it's not ideal. There's all kinds of reasons why visual or virtual assessment is not ideal, but it's the best we can do in some cases, and it still gives you helpful information. You can't control the background noise or the environment of the student. You're not sure how good their signal is, and if they have visual issues, doing anything on a screen is more problematic. It is irritating to the visual system, to the nervous system in general. And I have a dear friend, a colleague who's a behavioral optometrist, and she begs and pleads with the school districts and the private schools all the time to get the kids off the screens. So depending on their age, you don't want them, you know, late elementary, middle school, you don't want them on a screen more than 4 hours in a day tops. And it's beginning to actually do damage to the eyes. But this is the situation that we have, and we have some good options. So talk to your different manufacturers, your assessment manufacturers, and they have those. Sometimes there has to be a little special permission process, like maybe you have to already own a physical copy of the assessment, which you would need anyway for the books and the how-to and the scoring pages and all that good stuff. But they are making it possible. If it's something informal, like just a reading assessment or something like that. So you can take, you know, scan the page that you're wanting them to read and send it to them, have mom print it out. They've got a copy, you've got a copy, you say, okay, you set your timer, you're taking an informal reading assessment, set your timer 1 minute. Okay, read as far as you can, and you're marking the errors on your side just like you would be doing in the classroom and taking the data. And then when the timer goes off, you go, great, thank you. Maybe you have several copies of something. Whatever you would normally be giving them, unless it's like an IQ test or you're doing block design or something like that, that's gonna have to be done in person. There's a lot of ways we can make copies and send. You will need to check with your manufacturers to check with copyright issues though. Is that to this level and we need more down here?
I thought that was a good response.
Okay.
We'll see if, let me see here. Maggie, yes, she wrote, yes, thank you. Maggie,
Okay.
Thank you for the question. I have another one from Nikki. Any tips specifically on students with attention issues? She references her son who has ADHD.
Yes.
What are your initial tips on really approaching any curriculum and maybe diving into writing and rhetoric more specifically?
Find what is the most engaging, and I can't say enough nice things about writing and rhetoric. If it's other curricula, my favorite math for kiddos like that is Right Start Math. It has its issues, they all have their issues, but something with a lot of manipulatives where it's very hands-on, you're making it 3D. I can't tell you specific ones for like science or Latin or other things, but something that's very interactive that's going to hold their attention. You're going to want to move settings as much as possible, use balance as much as possible, make sure you're getting in a really good 15-30 minute PE session. Watch him, what is his best part of the day, and make his hardest subject. If he's a morning kid, his hardest subject needs to come first, and then work, you know, easier and easier things for him throughout the day. My best suggestion for kids with attention issues is a timer. You need to have a kitchen timer or whatever that is sitting there on the table, and once that timer goes off, and it may be 2 minutes, okay, whatever your kiddo's attention span is, that's okay. Get up and move. Go have an obstacle course set up in the living room or whatever, and they've got to do a somersault and jump up and do 5 jumping jacks or whatever. There's some really great resources for obstacle courses. Look into things like Brain Gym, and Ballavisics is my favorite. They've got some really great stuff where he can be standing on a balance board and bouncing a racquetball back and forth and talking through the lesson with you. They need movement as much as possible. And I'll put in the chat box about Ballavisics. Oop, I hit the wrong button. There we go. So there's a gazillion things, and call us. We're here to help. We can work just specifically with you, and you tell me what is specifically going on with your kid and what curriculum, and we will help you work through it.
Great tips. And Jillian Gray just put in the chat box that there is an app called Time Timer, and the time is visualized. So that's another great resource as well. Thank you. That was really helpful. I have another question, and we'll wrap up in about 10 minutes. So if you have any other questions, sneak those in quick before we're out of time this afternoon. And maybe this is from your own personal experience, Angelique, teaching in a classroom, but we have a comment. What are some of the reasons private schools do not want to address some needs for students with learning disabilities, and how might they bring more of a conversation about at their campus?
Right. I think that they just don't know what to do. Typical education programs don't train teachers for what to do for kiddos who have some type of struggle. They really focus much more on just how to teach the curriculum, and they might get into a little bit of differentiated instruction or something like that, or multiple learning styles, but they don't get into anything more than that. And that's because the public school systems have been set up that if they're not successful here, we're going to move them into special education or something in between. Depending on your state, it's going to vary, but they're just not trained. They don't know what to do. There's a private school where I am that the director, because of personal experiences in her own life, very much had a heart for that, and so she's brought me in a lot to teach and do in-services for the instructors, and then I basically acted as their special ed teacher, that they would send me referrals. But then the kids, the families, sometimes they couldn't afford that, or in the public school, that's paid for. In some states, they do have access to that through the public school, but that's not maybe something they don't want. I think it's administrators, especially in the current environment. I mean, what we're dealing with right now and the changes that are having to be made, depending on where you are and the requirements in your municipality or your state, they've got so much on their plate. But coming to them, sitting down, having coffee or something with your administrators and saying, hey, we know there's more and more and more kids. I mean, our curve is going way up with the kids that are having learning issues. And at some point, they're just going to have to deal with it, but they don't know what. So have a conversation with them. What can we do? How can we be helpful? Hey, we know there's this Center for Students with Learning Differences. They're a resource. There's books that we can certainly suggest that administrators can read. We can put together in-services. There's all kinds of things we could do to help them begin to understand this. Usually it's not that they don't want to help, they just don't know what to do because they haven't been taught that. Their hearts are very much for the kids. Does that make sense?
I think that's a great response. Thank you. One more question that has come in. Can you talk a little bit more about the benefits of reflex therapy and the areas that it helps?
Yes, I'm so glad that somebody asked that question. So reflexes serve two purposes. One is protection. You touch something hot, you jerk your hand back without thinking about it, you fall, you throw your hands out to catch yourself. The other one that we're usually not aware of is development. Reflexes begin in the womb, and that first flutter that you feel of baby moving is actually a reflex movement that is designed, they're all designed to bring on, primitive reflexes are designed to bring on cascades of neurological development. So baby's in the womb doing this, scrunching backwards and forwards, and that is innervating the spine and teaching the brain, this is my back, this is my front. Then they start going this way, like this, in the brain. The sides begin to innervate, and the brain is learning, this is my right side, this is my left side. And it goes on and on from there. If that process gets interrupted, whether it's during gestation, during labor and delivery, or in the first year of life, or shortly thereafter, that development doesn't happen, that neurological development, those cascades that are supposed to come on. So when we have kiddos, very often, like now, there are so many interventions happening during labor and delivery, and those have consequences. We've got more preemies. We've got kiddos that were on medication from early ages or had some type of health issue or an injury, and all of those things can interrupt these normal developmental processes. So what we want to do is go back and find them, and they can be fairly easy to fix. And when I say easy, I don't mean not take a lot of work. It can take months of work, but literally what we do with reflex integration is we stimulate the reflex point and put the body into the position that it's supposed to be in, for most reflexes, not for all. But that literally builds new nerve tissue in the muscles and joints and in the nervous system, and reteaches the brain what it's supposed, in the nervous system, what it's supposed to be doing. So for example, I've talked in my interview with Ron Jones about bad compalamento, which is in the hand, and it affects handwriting as well as the grasp reflex. So if we are teaching our little ones to walk by putting our fingers out and they hang on, so what is the grasp reflex? I fall, I catch myself. It's a fear response. So walking now becomes fearful. So if you've got little ones that are learning to walk, please let them pull up on their own. There's just a gazillion ways. These things, reflexes, have impacts that we aren't even aware of. The Russians identified them originally in the late 1800s and continued doing a lot of research behind the Iron Curtain. Then the British got involved in the 70s, but they relate to not just learning, but also mental health. If your reflexes in your feet aren't working, or your hips or your shoulders, you're not going to have a stable platform for your head and for your eyes. And so you may have visual issues. So it may not just be that we need visual therapy. It may be that we need reflex therapy to correct these other reflexes in the body so that our eyes can move smoothly within our skull, if that makes sense. So there's a lot to it, but they're very helpful things, and with some fairly simple exercises that usually with the help of a therapist to guide you so that you know what your child needs or your student needs, because it's different for everybody. It's not a clear-cut thing. It's more like a dance, a little of this, a little of that. We can see some really incredible improvement. Hopefully that. Oh, and so bad compalamento, when little ones are starting to feed themselves, they pick something up and put it in their mouths, and we interrupt that process in the West often by feeding them with the spoon, or not letting them put things in their mouth. And by putting things in their mouth, that's how they learn about the world around them, and they need lots of different textures and shapes and all kinds of things. And it actually, the sensors in the mouth is the beginning of 3D vision. So don't touch that, don't put that in your mouth. We're actually impairing visual development later in life.
It's really interesting. Almost like you should have done another session just on this.
Yeah. Oh, I could. It's so exciting because it's so hopeful. These kids that are struggling, and we've done years and years of special ed or tutoring or whatever, and we're not getting there. We need to be looking, we don't need to wait that long. I now have gone to the point where my standardized testing comes later. I start with reflexes. If there's no issues with the reflexes, then we move on and look at other things. But literally, because it starts in the womb, that's where we need to start.
Angelique, do you have a go-to book for a parent or a teacher who's trying to find out more information about this reflex therapy, or just even, you mentioned the history with the Russians and the British?
I should write one. I can direct you to, and I'll put the link in there, the Maskatova Neurosensory Motor Reflex Integration. Dr. Maskatova came over from Russia, and our headquarters are in Florida. There are other organizations that do reflex therapy and training. This is the one that I trained with. It's called MNRI. I'll put some links in the chat box. As far as I know, there's not really any parent-friendly or educator-friendly resources. Hey, you're so quick. Good job. But check YouTube as well. And there's a lot of, you won't find much of Dr. Maskatova speaking. I don't know how many languages she speaks, and I'm Dr. Maskatova, and then they cut to somebody else speaking. But it's great information. It's helpful for all kinds of things.
Excellent. Well, we have just a few minutes left, and I just wanted to wrap up with a couple resources here. So I am putting in, oops, I'm putting in a link to a booth that I'll be in. If you have some questions, particularly about writing and rhetoric, we have a lot of schools that are represented here this afternoon. So our sales team wanted to make themselves available to answer some questions on the text and even into you know, ordering, that kind of thing. So I will be available at that booth for about 30 minutes after this is over this afternoon. I'd also encourage you, if you have any additional questions, you are welcome to shoot a message at the info@classicalsubjects.com email address. We've been getting some in that way and can pass them along to Angelique or Joanne as well. If you think of something after this presentation this afternoon. And then just wanted to reference again our Scholé Academy website. So Scholé Academy is an online academy. It's about 4 or 5 years old now. It's starting to blur together. But we have been serving students all over the US and internationally the last few years. And this is our first year that we have this CSLD support under our tutoring center. So again, I encourage you to check out our website. Maybe Joanne, you could throw in the link to that tutoring center for you to read a little bit more about that and the kind of services that we provide, and work with someone like Angelique to give some feedback on students, your classroom, that kind of thing. And we're really excited about this this program that we have available through Scholé Academy. I think that is all commercially that I wanted to be able to provide to you. Joanne, anything additional that we can give as far as information about Scholé Academy or the tutoring center that I may have missed?
No, I think you've got it. And I just put in the link to the Learning Difference Center.
Awesome.
It's the last link that's in there. So that'll take you to Angelique's contact information and other special educators that we have on staff.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for being here. Thank you so much, Angelique, for your insight and for sharing. It was incredibly helpful to me, and I hope that you were all blessed this afternoon to be able to come and listen to her. And I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon and weekend, and that you have a smooth start to your school year coming up here in the next couple of weeks. Bye, everyone.